For 5 years, I paid my own daughter $2,000 a month in rent, just for the privilege of living under my own roof. She didn't know I was a secret millionaire, and she didn't know I owned the very house she was threatening to kick me out of. Well, she's about to find out. The hard way. If you believe that respect for elders is non-negotiable, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is a story about justice you won't want to miss. There's a particular scent that clings to old electronics, a perfume of hot dust on vacuum tubes, the subtle decay of plastic, and the sharp, clean tang of ozone that whispers of contained power. For me, that smell has always been a form of meditation. It's the smell of a tangible problem, a fractured world that can be made whole again with patience and a steady hand. My own hands. Now, a roadmap of 77 years, with their raised veins and sunspots, still move with a confident grace across the miniature cities of circuit boards and soldered joints. That afternoon, the patient on my workbench was a 1,950 seconds Philco radio, its polished mahogany case glowing like a warm memory under the focused beam of my desk lamp. It was the first major purchase Eleanor and I made as a married couple, and its silence for the past decade had felt like a small, personal failure. I was gently coaxing a new, glistening capacitor into place, a delicate heart transplant in progress, when the quiet sanctity of my room was shattered by a throaty roar from the driveway. I set down my soldering iron and leaned toward the window. My daughter, Chloe, and her husband, Mark, were circling their new acquisition. It was an enormous, pearlescent white SUV. A vehicle so large and aggressively styled, it looked less like a car and more like an armored transport for a minor celebrity. They weren't just looking at it, they were performing for their audience of one, a neighbor trimming his hedges. They ran their hands reverently over its gleaming flanks, Mark pointing out some feature near the grille with a proprietary swagger. A smile, thin and brittle as a dead leaf, touched my lips. They looked so proud, so thoroughly convinced of their own success. They had no idea that the substantial down payment for that monument to their status had been drawn directly from the $2,000 check I'd given them on the first of the month. A check I wrote for rent. Rent for a single bedroom in the very house I had paid for in cash 17 years ago. That secret was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my life. It was nearly 2 decades old, a weight I'd grown so accustomed to carrying that most days I barely noticed its heft. But in moments like this, it felt crushing. I remember the exact minute it was born. A frigid Tuesday in 2005. Eleanor was still with me then, a vibrant, warm presence that filled every room. We were at our old Formica kitchen table, the one that had seen decades of homework and heart-to-hearts, sharing a pot of Earl Grey tea as a wet snow fell outside. On the way home from a checkup, I'd stopped for gas and, on an uncharacteristic whim, bought a single lottery ticket. I scraped away the waxy film with the edge of a nickel, my heart not even remotely invested in the absurd fantasy of it all. And then, the numbers swam into focus, aligning in a perfect, impossible row. $1.8 million. The world didn't erupt into cheers or champagne. It fell utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Eleanor and I stared at the flimsy piece of cardboard, then at each other, our eyes wide with a terrifying disbelief. Her hand, warm and familiar, found mine across the tabletop. Her knuckles were white. "Oh, Perry," she had whispered, her voice barely audible. That night, we didn't speak of world cruises or fancy cars. We spoke, in hushed and worried tones, of our children. Chloe was already developing a taste for things she couldn't afford, perpetually chasing a lifestyle she saw in magazines. Our son, Brandon, was a whirlwind of brilliant but fleeting ambitions, lurching from one foolproof business idea to the next, leaving a trail of debt in his wake. If they know about this, Eleanor had said, her gaze fixed on the swirling snow outside the window, it will be the worst thing that ever happens to them. It won't be a ladder, it will be a pit. It will steal their ambition and poison their characters. She was right. She was always right. We made a solemn pact that night. The money would be our secret. It would be a fortress to protect our old age, and a true, meaningful inheritance to be given wisely, not a slush fund for their whims. A year later, a sudden aneurysm took her from me, and I was left alone as the sole keeper of our secret. The grief was a physical thing, a hollow ache in my chest. This big, beautiful house in Maple Creek, Ohio, was my first step in honoring our plan. I used a portion of the winnings to buy it outright. I told the kids the owner was an old colleague who gave me a good deal on rent. They accepted the story without question. It was easier for them to see me as a prudent, slightly pitiable old man living off a modest engineering pension. It fit their narrative of who I was and who they needed me to be. The loud slam of the front door yanked me back to the present day. Footsteps and excited voices echoed from the foyer. Dinner time. I descended the stairs to find Chloe pulling a pre-made lasagna from the oven. The scent of tomato and overbrowned cheese was aggressive. A poor imitation of a home-cooked meal. She'd gotten it from an upscale Italian deli, where a single tray cost more than a week's worth of my own groceries. "Oh, Dad, there you are," she said, her back to me. "Could you grab the salad from the fridge and the dressing, the good kind?" I retrieved the bag of pre-washed lettuce and a bottle of vinaigrette that cost $12. We sat at the enormous dining table, a piece of dark, polished wood that could comfortably seat 10. The three of us looked small and disconnected around it. Mark immediately propped his phone against a water glass, his thumb already swiping through an endless stream of content. Chloe poked at the lasagna on her plate. "Ugh, I think they overcooked it," she announced to the room. "It's so dry. You'd think for what they charge." Her voice trailed off into a dissatisfied sigh. I ate my minestrone soup, the same batch I'd been enjoying for 3 days. It was good, hearty, and cost next to nothing to make. I focused on the taste of the vegetables, the simple comfort of it. After a few minutes of near-total silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware, Mark finally looked up from his screen, his eyes, flat and uninterested, found mine. "Perry," he said, the tone utterly transactional. "The property tax bill came in the mail. Just a heads up. Your share is due. It went up again this year. Substantially." I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. My share. The words were an insult wrapped in the language of finance. I paid them $24,000 a year. The property taxes were less than a quarter of that. The money I gave them covered this entire house and its upkeep twice over, and funded the spaceship in the driveway. But I held my tongue. Arguing was pointless. It would only lead to accusations of being ungrateful, of being a burden. So I just gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Of course, son," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. I always pay my way. Chloe offered me a fleeting, patronizing smile. We know. Dad, we appreciate it. Then she returned to dissecting her expensive, disappointing dinner. In that moment, the weight of my secret felt unbearable. I wasn't their father. I was their oldest, most reliable utility. As if summoned by the tension, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with Brandon's name. I mumbled an excuse and stepped into the relative privacy of the hallway. Hey, Dad, how's my favorite engineer? His voice was a slick, buttery performance of affection. It was the voice he used when he wanted something. I'm doing all right. Brandon, just finished dinner. What's on your mind? Well, Dad, it's incredible. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity has just fallen into my lap. A tech startup. Revolutionary stuff. I'm on the ground floor. But I need to secure my spot. I just need a small injection of capital to get it off the ground. 5,000 should do it. This isn't like the other times. Dad, this is a sure thing. I swear. I'll pay you back double by Christmas. The artisanal alpaca sock company had also been a sure thing. So had the personalized dog food delivery service. My stomach tightened. I wanted, more than anything, for one of his dreams to come true, but I knew this was just another hole to pour money into. Son. I can't right now. The budget it's very tight. The lie was corrosive, tasting like rust and regret. The butter in his voice instantly curdled. Right. Tight. Of course. The story of my life. The silence that followed was heavy and accusatory. Well, don't you worry about it. I'll figure it out. I always do. He hung up. Not a goodbye. Not an I love you. Just a click. And the empty buzz of the dial tone. I stood in the dim hallway, leaning against the wall. The phone still pressed to my ear. I felt hollowed out. When I returned to the dining room, it was empty. Their plates, smeared with leftover sauce, sat exactly where they had left them. With a sigh that seemed to come from the soles of my feet, I began to clear the table. An hour later, a soft knock came at my bedroom door. It was Maya, my granddaughter, holding 2 steaming mugs. Pint flecks dotted her jeans, and her smile was the only truly genuine thing I'd seen all day. I made chamomile tea, she said softly. Thought you might like some. You looked a little tense at dinner. She was the one person in this house who actually saw me. She would sit in my room for hours, sketching in her notepad while I tinkered. The two of us existing in a comfortable, creative silence. She sat on the worn cushions of the armchair now, tucking her legs beneath her. Show me what you're working on, I said, and her face lit up. She talked about her art, about perspective and shadow, her hands shaping her ideas in the air. For a little while, I wasn't a financial instrument or a retired burden. I was just her grandpa, a man she respected. It was like a sip of cool water in a desert. I found myself on the verge of telling her the words, right there on the tip of my tongue. The urge to share the load, almost overwhelming. But I looked at her bright, unburdened face and swallowed them down. It was my secret to keep. After she left, the silence in the room felt different, heavier, restless. I began to tidy up. A pointless chore. From the back of my closet, I pulled out the heavy, gray metal box. It was cold to the touch. A dent, On one corner marked the time I dropped it moving in here. The latch was stiff. I opened it. The smell of old paper and history filled the air. My fingers bypassed the bank statements and the lottery confirmation letter. They went straight to the deed. The paper was thick. Important. Perry Cunningham. My name. Proof of a life. Of a reality that existed only within these four walls of my room. I remembered signing it at the lawyer's office, the sense of profound security it gave me. This house was meant to be my fortress. Instead, it had become my prison. I closed the lid with a quiet impression. Final click. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. I lay in bed, tracing the patterns of shadow on the ceiling, my heart hammering a frantic, anxious rhythm. The house I owned groaned and settled around me. Every sound a reminder of my status as an imposter in my own life. I got up and picked up the framed photograph of Eleanor from my dresser. "Oh, Ellie," I whispered to her smiling face. "I'm trying to honor our promise. I really am, but they're making it so hard. I feel like I'm disappearing." The next morning, the battlefield was the kitchen island. A glossy travel brochure was laid out, conspicuously open. A 2-week luxury cruise of the Greek Isles. Mark had circled the diamond suite package with a red pen. The price listed beside it was $10,000. It wasn't a hint, it was a demand. An invoice for services not rendered. I retreated to my room and the familiar comfort of the old Philco radio. I tried to lose myself in the work, but my hands trembled slightly. The sense of dread was no longer simmering, it was a rolling boil, scalding the inside of my chest. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, turning the clouds to bruised shades of orange and purple, my door opened without a knock. Chloe stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light. She didn't come in. She just leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold resolve. "Dad," she said. Her voice was flat, clinical, completely devoid of emotion. "We need to talk." She paused, letting the words hang in the air between us like a sentence being passed. "Things are going to have to change around here." Her words hung in the air of my small room, heavy and cold as iron. "Things are going to have to change around here." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a proclamation. The opening statement of a negotiation where one party had already decided the outcome. I turned slowly from my workbench. The half-repaired radio forgotten. Chloe stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her body language a fortress of impatience. The soft light from the hallway backlit her, obscuring her features and turning her into a severe, imposing silhouette. "What sort of things, Chloe?" I asked, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. "Not here," she said, her head gesturing towards the downstairs. "In the living room. Mark and I want to talk to you." The walk down the grand, curving staircase felt like a descent. Each step creaked under my weight, a sorrowful sound in the cavernous silence of the house. This staircase was one of the reasons I'd bought the place. I had imagined Eleanor sweeping down it, imagined future grandchildren sliding down the polished banister. Now, it felt like I was being led to an execution. The living room was Chloe's domain. It was decorated in sterile shades of gray and beige, with furniture that was chosen for its appearance, not its comfort. It looked like a photograph from a magazine, a room no one actually lived in. Mark was already there, seated on one of the stiff, unwelcoming sofas, his posture exuding a kind of bored authority. He didn't look up from his phone when I entered, Chloe directed me to a high-backed leather armchair that faced them both. It felt less like a piece of furniture and more like a witness stand. I sat, the cool leather sighing under my weight. My hands rested on the armrests, and I consciously had to stop myself from gripping them too tightly. Chloe sat down next to Mark, folding her hands neatly in her lap. She arranged her face into an expression of practiced sincerity. It was a look I'd seen her use on sales clerks and restaurant managers. It was her "I'm a reasonable person" mask. "Dad," she began, her voice soft and measured. "First of all, I want you to know that Mark and I love having you here. We do. It gives us peace of mind, knowing you're safe, and not rattling around in some lonely apartment." Mark grunted in what I assumed was agreement, his eyes still glued to his phone. "But," she continued, the word landing with a carefully calculated weight, "we've been looking at the numbers, and we have to be realistic. The cost of everything is going up. Groceries, insurance, the taxes on this house. It's becoming a real struggle for us to keep things afloat." I remained silent. I had seen their credit card bills, which they sometimes left on the kitchen counter. I knew what they spent on expensive dinners, designer clothes, and now, a small tank of an SUV. My $2,000 wasn't keeping them afloat, it was funding their lifestyle. "We feel that your contribution, while generous, doesn't fully reflect the current reality," she said, the corporate jargon sounding alien and obscene in this context. "We've been shouldering the difference for a long time, and frankly, it's putting a strain on our finances and on our future." Mark finally put his phone down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, adopting the posture of a man about to deliver a hard but necessary truth. "It's only fair, Perry," he said, using my first name as he always did when he wanted to establish a dynamic of equals, not of a son-in-law to his elder. "Everyone needs to pull their weight." My heart, which had been thumping a nervous rhythm, seemed to slow down. Each beat a heavy but painful thud. Here it was. The purpose of this entire performance. "What are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe took a deep breath. "A theatrical display of reluctance. We think it's fair to increase your rent by $500 a month. That brings the total to $2,500. It's still a bargain." "Really? For a room in a house like this? In this neighborhood?" $500. The amount was both absurd and deeply insulting. It wasn't about the money itself. I could afford it 10 times over. It was about the cold, transactional nature of the demand. It was the price of the cruise to the Greek Isles. For the first time in a long time, a spark of defiance flickered within me. "Chloe, I can't," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "My pension, it only stretches so far. $2,000 is already most of what I have left after my own expenses." It was a well-rehearsed lie, but it was the only defense I had. The mask on Chloe's face didn't just slip, it shattered. The practiced sincerity vanished, replaced by a look of undisguised irritation. The corners of her mouth tightened. "With all due respect, Dad, that's not our problem," she said, her voice losing its softness and gaining a sharp, metallic edge. "We have our own lives to think about, our retirement. We can't sacrifice our future because you didn't plan properly for yours." Each word was a physical blow. Didn't plan properly. I had worked for 45 years as an engineer. I had saved diligently. I had through a one-in-a-million stroke of luck. Secured not just my future, but theirs as well. If they had ever proven themselves worthy of it, a room in a decent nursing home would cost you triple that. Maybe more. She continued, her voice rising with a cruel logic. And you wouldn't have the run of the house. You'd be in one little room, eating what they serve you. On their schedule. You should be grateful for this arrangement. Grateful. The word echoed in the silent, cavernous room. I looked at my daughter. The little girl I had taught to ride a bike. The young woman I had walked down the aisle. And I saw a complete stranger. Her eyes weren't angry or sad. They were cold. Hard. Like polished stones. They were the eyes of a predator that had cornered its prey and was moving in for the kill. I was too stunned, too wounded to speak. My silence was a vacuum, and she filled it with her final, devastating volley. She stood up, smoothing down her perfectly pressed trousers. A gesture of finality. So, it's simple, she declared, looking down at me in my chair. Pay the extra $500, starting next month. Or you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. She paused, letting the words sink in, letting the poison do its work. Pay up, or get out. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a piece Eleanor had inherited from her own mother, began to chime the hour. H-deep. Resonant bong was a nail being driven into a coffin. The coffin of the family I thought I had. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the sound of that clock and the chilling emptiness in my daughter's eyes. It wasn't malice I saw there. It was worse. It was indifference. This wasn't personal for her. It was a business decision. I was a non-performing asset, and she was liquidating me. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember the walk back up the stairs. It felt as if I were floating, disconnected from my own body. My legs felt like lead, and each step was a monumental effort. A climb up a mountain of grief and betrayal. I reached my room and closed the door behind me. The soft click of the latch sounding as loud as a gunshot in the ringing silence. I didn't turn on the light. I just stood there in the darkness, my back against the door, as if to barricade myself against what had just happened. For years, I had swallowed my pride. I had paid my dues. I had endured the subtle and not-so-subtle slights you ever of you have panderous. The constant reminders of my status as a dependent. I had done it all because I held on to a flimsy, foolish hope that beneath the layers of entitlement and greed, my children were still in there somewhere, that they still loved me. That hope was now dead. The grief that followed was immense, a tidal wave that threatened to pull me under. But as the wave receded, something else began to take its place. The decades of quiet compromises, the thousands of small humiliations, finally curdled. The pain soured in my gut and then ignited, not into a hot, explosive rage, but into something cold and dense, like a block of ice forming around my heart. It was a terrifying, clarifying calm. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my dignity. They wanted my spirit. They wanted my soul. And they had just made it clear that they would give me nothing in return. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. I could see the silhouette of the photograph on my dresser. Eleanor, you were right. Ellie, I whispered to the darkness. You were right all along. My movements became slow, deliberate. I walked over to my closet and knelt down, my old knees protesting. I pulled aside the woolen blankets and lifted out the heavy, gray metal box. I carried it to my desk and sat down, my fingers tracing the dented corner. I took a deep breath and opened the lid. There it was. The deed. The proof of a reality they had never been allowed to see. I lifted it out. The thick, creamy paper cool against my fingertips. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. It said this house, this prison, was mine. It said that the power, all this time, had been in my hands. The old, corrosive belief I had lived by for so long. I must hide who I am to keep them near me, shattered into a million pieces. A new belief, hard and clear as diamond, formed in its place. They will never respect me. I must respect myself. The next morning, the sun streamed through my window with an intensity that felt new. The house was quiet. Chloe and Mark had already left for work. I showered, dressed, and made myself a pot of strong, black coffee. He sat at me desk, bypassing the radio for my old locker. Slow laptop. My hands were perfectly steady as I typed a search query into the browser. Best real estate agents in Dayton, Ohio. Maple Creek was too small. Too many people knew me. Knew my family. I needed someone discreet, professional, and from out of town. The search results populated the screen. I scrolled past the flashy ads and the two perfect headshots. Then a name caught my eye, David Chen, of a firm called Prestige Properties. His profile picture was professional. His expression, serious but kind. His bio specialized in high-value properties and discreet clientele. Discreet. That was the word. I looked at the phone number listed on the screen. My heart began to beat a little faster. But this time, it wasn't with anxiety. It was with a strange, unfamiliar feeling. It was the feeling of a man taking back control. I picked up my cell phone. The cool plastic, solid and real in my hand. I took one last look around the room that had been my sanctuary and my cell. Then I inhaled deeply and dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. Prestige Properties. This is David Chen. I cleared my throat. Hello. Mr. Chen, I said, my own voice sounding stronger, clearer than it had in years. My name is Perry. I have a rather unique property in Maple Creek. I'd like to discuss selling. I paused, choosing my final words with care. And it needs to be handled with absolute discretion. There was a brief, professional silence on the other end of the line. The kind of quiet that lets you know the person is truly listening, not just waiting for their turn to speak. I could hear the faint, indistinct murmur of an office in the background, a world away from the suffocating stillness of my daughter's house. Discretion is the cornerstone of my business. Mr. Perry. David Chen's voice came back, calm and reassuring. Why don't you come by my office in Dayton tomorrow morning? We can speak freely here. My heart hammered against my ribs. His office. In public. The thought of walking into a glass-walled building felt like a premature surrender, an exposure I couldn't risk. My secret had survived for nearly 2 decades by living in the shadows. It couldn't see the light of day. Not yet. No, I said, the word coming out firmer than I expected. Not your office. Not yet. I would prefer a more neutral location, some place public, but anonymous. Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. The reassessment of who he was dealing with. Was I a crank? A man in some kind of legal trouble? I held my breath. I understand, he finally said, his tone shifting from professional courtesy to one of intrigued accommodation. There's a small coffee shop in Yellow Springs called The Daily Grind. It's halfway between us. Quiet on a weekday morning. Shall we say 10 o'clock tomorrow? 10 o'clock is perfect, I replied, a wave of relief washing over me. Thank you, Mr. Shen. Please, call me David. The drive to Yellow Springs the next morning felt like a clandestine mission. I waited until Chloe and Mark's new SUV had roared out of the driveway before I left, taking my old to reliable sedan that hummed along with a quiet dignity they so despised. The morning was crisp and clear. The Ohio landscape painted in the soft, hopeful colors of early autumn, but I saw none of it. My focus was entirely internal. A constant rehearsal of what I would say, what I would reveal. For the first time in 5 years, I was acting entirely for myself, on my own behalf, and the feeling was a terrifying exhilarating mix of freedom and fear. The daily grind was exactly as David had described, quiet, smelling of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. I saw him immediately, sitting at a small table in the corner, a laptop open in front of him. He was younger than I'd pictured, perhaps in his late 40s, with a sharp, intelligent face and an impeccably tailored suit that spoke of quiet success. He stood as I approached, his handshake firm and dry. "Perry," he said with a small, welcoming smile. "David, please, have a seat. Can I get you anything?" "Just a black coffee." "Thank you," I said, sitting down opposite him. He motioned to a barista, and for a few moments, we engaged in the meaningless small talk of strangers, the weather, the drive. But an unspoken question hung in the air between us. When the coffee arrived, David closed his laptop, giving me his full, undivided attention. "So, Perry," he began, his voice low, "you mentioned a unique property and the need for discretion. Why don't you tell me what's on your mind?" This was it, the point of no return. I reached down into the simple canvas tote bag I'd brought with me and pulled out a manila folder. My hands trembled almost imperceptibly as I slid it across the table. Inside, protected by a plastic sleeve, was the deed to the house on Sycamore Lane. My house. David opened the folder. His eyes, quick and practiced, scanned the document. I watched his eyebrows raise, just a fraction of an inch. He read it once, then read it again. More slowly this time. He looked up from the paper, his professional mask firmly in place. But I could see a new light in his eyes, understanding. He was no longer dealing with a potentially troubled old man. He was dealing with a property owner with a very specific and very unusual problem. "My daughter and her husband live in this house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They believe they are renting it from a third party. They also believe that I am their tenant, a tenant in my own home." David leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving my face. He didn't show shock or pity. He just listened. His expression, one of intense concentration. He was processing the information not as a family drama, but as a set of logistical challenges. "They are not aware that you are the owner," he stated. "A fact, not a question. No one is," I confirmed. "Not my daughter. Not my son. Not a soul. It's a secret I've kept for a very long time. For reasons that are complicated. And now you wish to sell." "Now I wish to sell," I repeated. the words tasting of finality and freedom. And I need to do it without them finding out until the very last possible moment. Is that possible? David looked down at the deed again. Then back at me. A slow, thoughtful nod. Mr. Perry, he said, his voice now imbued with a new level of respect. This is highly unusual. I'll grant you that, but from a legal standpoint, it is perfectly straightforward. You are the sole, unencumbered owner. You have every right to sell your property. He leaned forward, a glint of strategic excitement in his eyes. The key will be the approach. No for sale sign on the lawn. No public open houses. We'll market this privately, as a pocket listing. I have a list of pre-qualified investors and cash buyers who are always looking for properties in neighborhoods like yours. We'll present it as a tenanted property, which is true, with the tenants to be vacated at closing. It will be faster, cleaner, and much kidder. And my involvement, I asked, my throat tight. Minimal and completely confidential. He assured me. All communication with your daughter will be handled by me. Or, once we have a buyer, their legal representative, as far as she'll know, the anonymous landlord, she's never met, has simply decided to sell. I will ensure my team is silent as the grave. The promise, delivered with such calm authority, was like a balm on my frayed nerves. I had an ally. For the first time in years, I was not alone in my secret. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations. The first hurdle was getting photographs. David needed high-quality pictures for the private listing. We planned it for a Tuesday morning, a time I knew Chloe and Mark would be at work and Maya at her college classes. The photographer, a discreet young woman David had personally vetted, arrived precisely at 9 a.m. Letting her into the house felt like an act of profound betrayal and liberation. I walked her through the rooms, my own home, pretending to be nothing more than the helpful tenant. The landlord wants to get some updated photos for insurance purposes. I would say if anyone were to ask, the lie was thin, but it was all I had. The flash of her camera felt like a series of small explosions, each one capturing a piece of the life I had built and was now dismantling. She moved through Chloe and Mark's meticulously decorated, impersonal spaces, then through my own cluttered, comfortable room. We were in the kitchen, the photographer capturing the morning light hitting the granite countertops, when the sound of a car in the driveway sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. I glanced out the window. It was the white SUV. Chloe. She was home. My mind raced. A frantic scramble for a plausible explanation. My heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Pack up. Now. I whispered urgently to the photographer. Go out the back door. Through the garden. I'll meet you at the street. She nodded, her eyes wide, quickly and silently disassembling her tripod. Just as the key turned in the front door lock, I intercepted Chloe in the foyer. She was holding a file. I forgot the Henderson proposal for my 1 o'clock. She said, flustered. What's going on? Who was that? She asked, her eyes darting towards the kitchen. My mind, sharpened by adrenaline, produced a lie with astonishing speed. Oh, that was just an old friend from my engineering days, I said, forcing a casual smile. Frank. He was just passing through town. Stopped by to say hello. I was just seeing him out the back. Didn't want to disturb you. She looked at me, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. Frank. I don't remember a Frank. It's been years, I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Before your time, I suppose." She seemed to accept it, her mind already back on her Henderson proposal. She bustled into the home office, grabbed another file, and with a distracted "Bye, Dad," she was gone. I stood in the foyer for a full minute after the door closed, my body trembling with the aftershock of the near miss. The taste in my mouth was metallic, the taste of fear. Getting them out of the house for viewings was the next challenge. David's strategy of targeting investors meant we only needed a few key appointments. I resorted to a tactic of strategic generosity. That Friday, I presented Chloe with a gift card to an expensive restaurant in Dayton they loved. "I saw this was on offer." I lied. "I thought you and Mark deserved a nice night out." "My treat." Chloe's eyes lit up. Suspicion was no match for her love of a free meal. "Oh, Dad, you didn't have to," she said, though she took the card without a moment's hesitation. "That's so thoughtful." While they were out enjoying steak and wine on my dime, I was showing a stone-faced investor and his wife through my home, again under the guise of the helpful tenant. It was a surreal, deeply unsettling experience. Watching strangers assess the walls that held my memories, discussing potential renovations and rental yields. The following week, as the plan was quietly moving forward, Brandon called again. This time, the buttery warmth was gone, replaced by a raw, whining anger. "I can't believe you, Dad," he started, without even a hello. "I lost out on that tech deal because you couldn't spare a measly $5,000, my one big shot, and my own father wouldn't back me." "Brandon, it wasn't a sure thing," I said, tiredly. "You'll regret this." "Old man," he spat, his voice thick with resentment. "When you're all alone, in some state-run home, don't come crying to me. You betrayed your own family." He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, and felt nothing but a profound, hollow sadness. Betrayed my family. I looked around the beautiful, silent house that I paid for. A house his sister was actively trying to price me out of. His words, meant to wound me, instead acted as a final, clarifying dose of poison. They burned away the last lingering vestiges of my guilt. 2 days later, David called. His voice was different. It was energized. "Perry, we have an offer. A very strong one. A young couple, both doctors at the Cleveland Clinic. They're looking to relocate. They're not investors. They want to live in it. And they're offering cash. Full asking price. They can close in 3 weeks." 3 weeks. The timeline was suddenly, terrifyingly real. "Diet," I said, my voice a croak. "Accept the offer." That evening at dinner, an uneasy quiet had settled over the house. Chloe and Mark were short with each other, bickering about some bill. I ate my soup, an island of calm in their sea of self-inflicted stress. "You've been in a strange mood lately, Dad," Chloe observed, her eyes narrowing at me over a forkful of takeout salad. "Quiet. Almost happy. Did you find a cheaper place to live?" The question was laced with a condescending hope. I offered her a small, enigmatic smile. It was the first truly genuine smile I'd felt in days. "Oh, I'm just making some plans for my future, dear," I said, the truth hiding in plain sight. "Finalizing some old business." The day of the closing was overcast and gray, a fitting backdrop for the gravity of the occasion. I met David at a sterile, Anonymous title agency office downtown. I was introduced to the lawyer as the seller's representative. My true identity. A secret kept even at the final table. I sat in a leather chair that smelled of polish and money and signed my name over and over again. My hand was shaking, not from age or fear, but from the sheer, earth-shattering significance of the act. As my pen scratched across the last page, my signature transferring ownership, I thought of another document I had signed. So many years ago, my marriage certificate with Eleanor. One signature to begin a life, another to reclaim one. I walked out into the gray afternoon and sat in my car for a long time. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my bank. A notification of a wire transfer deposit. The number had so many zeros. It looked like a mistake. The house was no longer mine. The money was. I took a deep breath and made one last call. "David," I said when he answered. "It's done." "I saw," he said, his voice warm with a professional satisfaction. "Congratulations. Perry, you're a free man." "It's time," I said. "Tell the new owner's lawyer to proceed." "Consider it done," he replied. "The notice will be delivered by certified mail tomorrow." That evening, I sat in my room, the old Philco radio quietly humming on the workbench beside me. For the first time, I had managed to get a signal, a faint classical station playing through the static part. It felt like a ghost had started to speak again. I was listening to a Mozart concerto when I heard the familiar lumbering sound of the mail truck making its way down our street. I didn't move. I just sat there, my heart beating a slow, steady, powerful rhythm. I heard the metallic clank of our mailbox opening and closing. It was done. The bomb had been placed. The fuse was lit. All I had to do now was wait for the explosion. The quiet hum of the old radio was the only sound in the room. A fragile thread of music stitching together the heavy silence of the late afternoon. I didn't move from my chair. I sat there, a statue carved from patience, and listened to the sounds of the house. I heard the distant sigh of the furnace, the faint groan of the pipes in the walls, the whisper of the wind against the window pane. These were the sounds of my house, the home I had known as both a fortress and a prison. I waited. The clock on my bedside table ticked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each second a stone dropping into a deep well of anticipation. An hour passed, then another. The sun began its slow descent, and the light in my room softened from a bright, clinical white to a warm, forgiving gold. It was almost 5:30 when I finally heard it, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, the electronic beep of a car being locked, the jingle of keys at the front door. Chloe was home. I closed my eyes, my hands resting on the worn arms of my chair. My heart, which had been a steady drum all afternoon, picked up its tempo, a nervous flutter in the hollow of my chest. I heard the front door open and close, the clatter of her keys being tossed into the ceramic bowl on the hall table, the rustle of her coat being hung in the closet, the familiar, rhythmic click of her heels on the hardwood floor as she walked toward the kitchen. Then, a pause. I pictured her stopping at the small table by the stairs, where the day's mail was always placed. The sounds that followed were small, mundane, yet charged with an almost unbearable tension. The soft rip of a catalog being opened, the crinkle of a cellophane window on a bill envelope. Then, a different sound, a sharper, more deliberate tearing. It was the sound of thick, Legal-grade paper being ripped open with force. Silence. A deep, profound, and absolute silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the house. It lasted for 10 seconds, then 20. It was the silence of a mind refusing to process what the eyes are seeing. And then, the explosion. It wasn't a roar. It was a shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Sharp and jagged. Mark. His name was a weapon. Hurled through the house. Mark. Get in here now. I heard the frantic thud of his footsteps coming down the stairs from the home office. What is it? What's wrong? What the hell is this? Her voice was shaking with a furious, terrified energy. Eviction. Notice. Eviction. This has to be a joke. It's a mistake, some kind of sick prank. I heard the rustle of the paper as Mark must have taken it from her. Another silence. This one shorter. Chloe. This is from a law firm. This isn't a joke. It says the property has been sold. We have 30 days to vacate. Sold, she screamed. The word cracking with hysteria. Sold how? By who? The landlord has never even contacted us. He doesn't exist. We have to call Dad. He'll know what to do. He has to fix this. My phone, sitting on the desk beside the radio, remained silent. I knew it wouldn't be for long. I took a slow, deep breath, the air filling my lungs and steadying the tremor in my hands. I was ready. As if on cue, the phone began to buzz. Its vibration, a furious, angry insect against the polished wood of the desk. The screen lit up with her face. Chloe. I let it buzz for 3 full rings before I picked it up. The picture of calm. Hello, I said. My voice even. Dad. Her voice was a torrent of panic and rage. So loud, I had to hold the phone slightly away from my ear. Thank God. Something terrible has happened. Some horrible mistake. We got a letter. Some legal nonsense. Saying the house has been sold, that we're being evicted, Dad. You have to do something. You have to call the landlord. You have to tell him he can't do this. You have to fix this. She wasn't asking for my help. She was issuing a command. I, her dependent, her tenant, her fatherly burden, was being ordered to fix the cataclysm that had just befallen her. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. There's no mistake. Chloe, I said, my voice a quiet counterpoint to her storm. The house has been sold. What do you mean? It's been sold, she shrieked. Who sold it? Who has the right? This was the moment, the culmination of 20 years of secrets, 5 years of humiliation, and 3 weeks of clandestine planning. The entire universe seemed to hold its breath. I did. I said. The 2 words were the quietest, heaviest things I had ever said in my life. I sold it. A sound came from her end of the line. A choked, confused gasp, as if the air had been punched from her lungs. You, what are you talking about? You're the tenant. No. Chloe, I said, and the dam of my long-held silence finally broke. The truth pouring out in a calm, steady, and unstoppable flood. I was never the tenant. I was the owner. I bought this house with my own money 17 years ago. For the past 5 years, Chloe, I have been your landlord. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a silence filled with the shrieking of a worldview being torn apart. It was the silence of a lifetime of assumptions turning to dust. I could hear her breathing, ragged and shallow. I could picture her face, the arrogant self-assurance draining away, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. When she finally spoke, her voice was a strangled, venomous whisper. "You're lying. You're senile. You've lost your mind." "I have never been more sane in my life," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Check the county records if you don't believe me. The deed has been in my name since the day I moved in." The whisper erupted into a full-blown roar of incandescent rage. You did this, you betrayed us, you let us take care of you. Let us build a life here. All while you were lying to our faces, this was our home, ours." "No, Chloe," I said, the cold calm, in my own voice, surprising me. "It was my house. You just lived in it. And you tried to kick me out of it for an extra $500 a month. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." "I hate you," she screamed, her voice raw, with a pain born not of love lost, but of assets liquidated. "You are a sick, twisted, evil old man. You've ruined our lives." Before she could spew any more venom, another call came through. "Brandon." I clicked over without a word to Chloe. Dad Brandon's voice was tight with a controlled fury. "Chloe just called me. Hysterical. She's saying some crazy stuff about you owning the house and selling it. Tell me she's lost her mind." "She's telling the truth." "Son," I said, wearily. The control in his voice snapped. "You did what? Are you insane? That house was our inheritance. That was supposed to be ours. All that money. You had all that money, and you let me struggle. You let me beg you for a lousy $5,000. You senile old fool. You betrayed your own family." "The family betrayed itself, Brandon," I said, the last vestiges of my sorrow giving way to a profound, granite-hard resolve. "You all made your choices. You saw me as a wallet, not as a father. Now the wallet is closed. You will regret this," he seethed. "You'll be alone." "No, son," I said, and for the first time, I felt the truth of my own words deep in my bones. "I'm finally beginning to live." I ended the call. Then, with a calm, deliberate series of taps on the screen, I blocked his number. I clicked back over to Chloe's call. She was still screaming. A stream of incoherent rage and threats. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red icon on the screen, severing the connection. Then, I blocked her number. 2. I set the phone down on the desk. The silence that rushed back in to fill the void was different. Now, it was no longer the silence of oppression or loneliness. It was the silence of peace. The silence of sovereignty. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather creaking softly. A tremor started in my hands, then spread through my arms, my chest, my legs. It was the aftershock of a battle that had been waged within me for 2 decades. And then, for the first time since Eleanor died, I wept. Not for the loss of my children, for I had lost them long ago. I wept for the man who had hidden in the shadows for so long. I wept with relief. A few weeks passed. Weeks of beautiful, blessed silence. I moved my things into a bright, modern 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't as large or as grand as the house, but every inch of it was mine. The living room had a large picture window that flooded the space with afternoon light. I spent the first few days unpacking my old books, the familiar scent of aging paper and binding glue filling my new home with the ghosts of old friends. I set up my workshop in the 2nd bedroom, my tools and projects laid out in perfect, logical order. There was no one to tell me I was making a mess. One afternoon, after arranging the last of my engineering textbooks on a shelf, I sat down with a cup of tea and my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, past the block numbers of my children, until I found the one that mattered. I dialed. "Hi." Grandpa Maya's voice was a welcome melody. "Hello. Sweetheart, how are your classes?" We talked for a while. About her art. About her dreams. She never once asked about the deafening silence from her parents. About the cataclysm that had surely upended her life. She just talked to me. To her grandpa. "Maya," I said, my voice a little thick with emotion. "I've done something. For you. I've set up a trust fund. It's not a small amount. It's enough to pay for your tuition at any art school in the country you want to go to. It's enough for you to get your own place. To buy your supplies. To live without worrying about money while you create. It's for your future." She was silent for a long moment. I heard a soft sniffle. "Grandpa." I don't know what to say," she whispered. Her voice choked with tears. "Why?" I looked at the photograph of Eleanor I had placed on my new mantelpiece. "Your grandmother and I. We always believed in you," I said, "and we wanted to make sure you had the freedom to become the person you were always meant to be. Just make your grandmother proud. Sweetheart, that's all I ask." That evening, I took a cup of coffee out onto my small balcony. It overlooked a quiet park, and the setting sun was painting the clouds in fiery strokes of orange, pink, and purple. The air was cool and clean. I watched the last sliver of the sun dip below the horizon. The rage was gone. The grief was gone. The heavy, suffocating weight of my secret was gone. I was not a millionaire. I was not a landlord. I was not a tenant or a burden or a wallet. I was Perry, a man drinking coffee on his own balcony, watching the day come to a peaceful end. And I was, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly free.